Okay, tonight is Matthew chapter 11.
And it came to pass, when Jesus had made an end of commanding his 12 disciples, he departed thence to teach and to preach in their cities. Now when John had heard in the prison the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples, and said unto him, Art thou he that should come, or do we look for another?
Right, as chapter 11 begins, now, having gone through chapter 10, the chapter 10 was Jesus' direction to the 12 apostles, the 12 disciples, as to what they should do. And so now you see 11, it came to pass when Jesus had made an end of commanding the 12 disciples, as he departed to teach and preach in the cities, all right? So again, this 11 follows 10, right? And so it's now 2 and 3 begins the next part of this particular chapter, where it says, now when John heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples to ask him a question. John the Baptist was a straight out preacher, and of course he was preaching about Jesus, and so that made him unpopular with some people for that reason. But also the king had committed some adulterous behavior, right? Kind of stealing his brother's wife, and so taking her to be his wife. And so John the Baptist called him out on it. Basically said, you're a sinner, right? You took your brother's wife, and you're a sinner. So well, in those times, and perhaps up to even today, where somebody's a king, I mean, you don't do that, right? So the king says, throw him in jail, right? So because he said bad things about me, so I don't like that. So that's why John was in prison, right? So here he's sitting in prison, right? And again, perhaps at this particular time, he's sitting there thinking, I don't really done anything wrong, and I've been teaching about Jesus, and yet here I am, kind of falsely imprisoned. So you may start to wonder what's happened here. I mean, shouldn't Jesus be getting me out, or why am I here? And so that's why it says in 3, it says he sent his 2 of his disciples and said, "Are you the one who should come, or do we look for another?" Right? And I mean, normally, based on what we've read other times, again, you wouldn't think that there would be any doubt, because John the Baptist is the one who baptized Jesus. So I mean, he saw the dove landing on him and so forth. So clearly he knew that this was the Christ. But yet, you have to figure, well, it's just he's now sitting in prison, perhaps looking at execution at some point, saying, gee, shouldn't Jesus be coming to rescue me or something? I mean, why is this going on? So he sent 2 of his disciples somehow and said, go make sure that we really got this right here, that this is a Jesus, or this is the Christ who we've been waiting for. And so that's why he goes and asks them, are you the one who should come, or should we be looking for somebody else?
Jesus answered and said unto them, Go and show John again those things which ye do hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he whosoever shall not be offended in me.
So, because this was John the Baptist, so Jesus gave an answer, right? And he said to them, go back and tell John this, right? And so he gives a list of all the things that are happening, right? He says, hey, go and tell them that you've heard about or saw the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf can hear, the dead are raised up, all right? These are all things that are happening, so clearly I am exactly who you would expect me to be, right? So, if you're wondering at all, well, here's all the evidence that shows that I'm in fact the Son of God, the one that everybody's been waiting for, right? And, this is consistent with what, we've been teaching over the last couple of years, right? We're at least praying to God about, that we want to see more of this kind of stuff, right? Because it's evidence of who we are. So that, the same way that Jesus pointed to that as evidence when he's asked, are you the Son of God? Well, let me show you all these different things here, right, that are happening. So I would love to do the same, right? So is this the church? Well, let's go ahead and list all these things here, right, that are going on, because that's evidence that we have the power of God with us, right? So that's what he pointed to, right? And then at the very end of that, it says, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. In other words, the fact that even though we're paying attention to those who were poor and not just hobnobbing with the rich, that's also an indication that this is now somebody different, because the others only wanted to be involved with the powerful people, the people who had position, and the poor are not in that category. So it says that these are all evidence that Jesus would be who John really was expecting him to be, right? And then finally he says, blessed is he who won't be offended in me, which is, again, similar to what we talked about in the previous chapter, right? Where, if you're accepting and willing to represent the Lord, well, you're blessed in that, all right? But if somebody who's offended or doesn't want to do that, well, then they miss out on that blessing.
And as they departed, Jesus began to say unto the multitudes concerning John, What went ye out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken with the wind? But what went ye out for to see? A man clothed in soft raiment? Behold, they that wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. But what went ye out for to see? A prophet? Yea, I say unto you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare thy way before thee. Verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he.
Jesus was teaching the people. This is when the two disciples of John came to him, all right? So he was in front of other people that he gave this sort of response, all right? And so that perhaps when the people said, hey, those guys are representing John the Baptist, I mean, shouldn't he like know better? Shouldn't he know who you are? Maybe they were criticizing him or being critical of him for questioning in this way. So I think that's what leads up to what these verses are saying, all right? Whereas now Jesus is going to show that he had a lot of respect for John the Baptist, and really that he was a called man and a great man of God. All right, that's why it says in 7, it says, he began to say to the multitudes concerning John, those who were there, it says, when you all went out to the wilderness, all right, and what were you expecting to find there? When they all went to and found, let's say, John baptizing people, and perhaps they even witnessed John baptizing Jesus. What did you expect to see when you went out there? He says, a reed shaken with the wind, which, that to me would be basically somebody who's like wishy-washy, or anything, the reed blows back and forth. So if you're blown with the wind, it usually means you're not firm in your belief, right? Would you expect to see that? Somebody not firm in his belief? We're expecting to see somebody clothed in soft raiment, in other words, nice clothes and so forth, because obviously John was not that either, right? So he wasn't somebody, a reed shaken in the wind. He wasn't somebody dressed nice. He was wearing just whatever he could find from the forest or whatever to clothe himself, all right? So if you're expecting those, it says, behold, they that wear soft clothing are in the king's houses, right? But if you were looking for a prophet, well then, and now you came to the right place. He says, because I say unto you, and even more than a prophet he was, because he had a particular calling as the forerunner of Jesus. Right? I mean, he was foretold in the Old Testament prophecies that he would come. Right? So he wasn't just even a random prophet. He was somebody who was specifically talked about and expected, and he was born of Elizabeth at an advanced age and so forth, even miraculously. So he was brought forth for a particular purpose. So now when it gets down to 10, it says, this is he of whom is written, I'll send my messenger, which shall prepare the way before thee, right? So that's why he's referencing, in prophecy that talks about him. And then finally in 11, it kind of summarizes it, when this is a very, very interesting statement that he makes about John, right? He says, among all that are born of women, which is anybody, right? Which is everybody. There has not risen a greater than John the Baptist. So the word is saying this is, no one would exceed, how great this man has been as a servant of God and for what God called him to be, right? So he's mentioning that. He says that. So don't talk bad about him. Don't think bad about him, because there's no one that you can point to say this person was greater than John the Baptist. But in the second half of 11, it says, but he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he, right? So in other words, once you're there, you're greater than anybody on earth, because now you've inherited eternal life. So like I said, I always like that contrast, right? Here's the greatest man that ever lived is born of women, but he is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than him. All right, so just to put it all in perspective. So don't talk bad about this guy, because he's a great man. All right, but understanding that those who make it the kingdom of heaven, they're of course the greatest of all, because they've been exalted by the Lord.
And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if ye will receive it, This is Elias which was for to come. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear.
Here in verse 12 it says, from the days of John till now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. Right? That doesn't really sound very logical. Okay. The way that I would take this, right, and from again studying this and trying to figure out what this could mean, right, that it really, especially at this particular period of time, the only real resident of the kingdom of heaven, as we would describe it at this moment, is God, right? Because no one had resurrected yet, because Jesus was just coming, right? So he was the only one living there. So really, to me, when they say the kingdom of heaven is at hand, right, really all the believers of Jesus would encompass the kingdom of heaven at that moment, right? Which would include people who were on earth, right? So really, I mean, sometimes I like to feel like that's where we are, right? We're residing in God's kingdom, or the kingdom of heaven, and granted, we're not at the final heaven place till we go there, but to me, this is heaven on earth, all right? As we're members of the church, part of the body of Christ, right? So if you look at it that way, that the kingdom of heaven would encompass the believers, right? Then now you go back to what he's saying here. He says, from the days of John the Baptist, which is when it began, until now, says the kingdom of heaven suffered violence, and the violent take it by force, right? In other words, that those who were opposed to it were now using violence and threats and whatever. Like they took John, they put him in prison, right? So they're taking people by force. And so that's the way that I would phrase it, just saying that that's why John's where he is, because the kingdom of heaven is under attack. The people who don't believe in me are attacking the believers and trying to either kill them, discredit them, lock them up, whatever they can do to try to derail this particular movement. All right, so that's the way I would take that. It's not heaven up there that's suffering violence, because nobody can get there to hit it up with violence, but it would be the extension of the kingdom of heaven here on earth that would be suffering that kind of violence, and those who were in that were some victims of that. As we mentioned earlier, all the prophets in the law prophesied until John, because the prophets kind of took it down to there, and now he's saying from John till now, this is what has occurred, right? Now in 14, there's another verse that people have a hard time with. I said, if you will receive it, this is Elias which was for to come. Okay, now, first of all, Elias is actually a name for somebody else in the Bible, a name for Elijah. All right, but still, that doesn't necessarily clear it up, all right? It says if you'll receive it, this is Elijah, which was for to come, all right? So, I mean, there are some people that look at this and say, oh, so John the Baptist was really Elijah coming back from the dead, all right, or coming back to earth, all right? Some people think that, right? I don't think that, but that's what some people think that, okay? And actually, I mean, what would lend just a tiny bit of credence to that is that why was how was Elijah different from other prophets in the Old Testament? He didn't die, okay? And he was the one that the chariot came down and with the angels, and he got in the chariot and away he went up into the heavens. And his friend or partner Elisha witnessed the whole thing. So he's the one that said what happened. So Elijah, as far as we can tell, never died. He went right up to heaven in the chariot. So they said, well, maybe he came back down in the chariot, right, and came back to earth. But yet, there's the earlier account of John the Baptist being born, so that would be a little more of a stretch. Did he zap into Elizabeth's womb and become a baby again? Not likely, right? So now I've said what it's not. So, but what is it? All right. The best verse that I can line up with this, all right, is Luke chapter 1, verse 17. This is the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, where he's describing the birth of John the Baptist, right? It's the one where it talks about Elizabeth and Zacharias and so forth, right? And what it says about John the Baptist, it says, and he shall go before him, meaning Jesus, in the spirit and power of Elias, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So it was said that he would go forward in the spirit of Elias. So therefore, when I read this, it says, if you will receive it, this is Elias, which was for to come, somebody carrying the spirit of Elias or Elijah to come and pave the way for Jesus to come and announce his coming. Okay, so John the Baptist was somebody who came in the spirit of Elijah, and so that's really what he's saying. But you would only get that, he's saying, if you're able to, first of all, know who Elijah is, and to understand this, right? That's why he says, if you will receive it, this is Elijah which was to come. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you're going to say, what do you mean Elijah? It's just John, all right? But if you have some spiritual understandings, then you would understand this is Elijah. I mean, this is someone coming in the spirit of Elijah, which is John the Baptist.
But whereunto shall I liken this generation? It is like unto children sitting in the markets, and calling unto their fellows, and saying, We have piped unto you, and ye have not danced. We have mourned unto you, and ye have not lamented. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he hath a devil. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, Behold, a man gluttonous and a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. But wisdom is justified of her children.
Kind of turning to just talking about the environment in general, the people in general here, right? He's saying, whereunto shall I liken this generation? What's really going on around here? And he says he's likening it to children sitting in the market, saying what it says in 17. And to me, it's people who are maybe don't even know what they want, or they're confused about. They say, well, we want this, but then that happens. Well, then no, we want this. Right, so he's saying we piped unto you and you haven't danced, but then says we mourned and you haven't lamented. So in other words, every time maybe somebody is hearing what they're doing or seeing what they're trying to do, then they change to something else. All right, so it's hard to really even react appropriately to it. And he's just giving an example, because now following in 18 and 19 is what he's really trying to get at the point. All right, it says for John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he hath the devil. All right, so let's just pause there for a moment. See, John, I remember, lived in the wilderness, all right? So he's not really eating normal stuff, all right? As I recall, he ate mostly like locusts and that kind of stuff, right? So he's eating bugs and eating off the ground and so forth, and off the land, and that this is because he lived in the wilderness, right? He was wearing a camel's hair garment, so he was there just for a certain purpose, which was to preach the gospel, to preach about Christ and to baptize. Talk about being like dedicated. This was all he did. So he wasn't worried about where am I living, what am I wearing, what am I eating. He just kind of existed, right? So people saw that and they said, he's weird, right? He's weird, this guy, right? Or he has a devil, right? He's nuts, right? And maybe we would say the same if we saw somebody like that. If we saw somebody living out in the woods and and eating bugs, you'd probably say he's pretty weird, right? So this is what they said about him. He has a devil, right? So, but then on the flip side, it says, Jesus says in 19, it says he came in a more normal fashion. It says eating and drinking and so forth. And now instead, people want to criticize that. They say, oh, look, he's a glutton. Look, he's a winebibber. Look, he's this or that, right? So in other words, you can't win, right? John, on the one case, doesn't really do much eating or drinking, so he's weird. So Jesus comes and does normal eating and drinking. Well, he's a problem too, right? So in other words, just not, just want to be critical, all right? And think about it, that we could know people like that today, right? It's kind of like no matter what you do, it's going to criticize. So when you realize that, you just don't worry about it anymore, right? You say, well, it doesn't matter, because if people are not going to be pleased or not going to be satisfied, then you just do what's right and what has to be done. You don't worry about what people are saying. And so that's really where he's headed with this, all right? He says, a friend of publicans and sinners, right? We've seen Jesus criticized that way, right? He's hanging out with the sinners, and knows how the publicans are grouped with the sinners. The publicans are the tax collectors, right? The tax collectors and all those other sinners, right? They put them all together, and this is who Jesus would spend time with, like including like Matthew, who's the writer of this book, right? That was one example of that. But if Jesus didn't spend time with the sinners, they wouldn't have come to repentance and wouldn't have been one of his followers. So that's obviously that's why he's doing it. But see, if you want to try to criticize somebody or pick on somebody, so to pick on, look who he hangs out with. I mean, he can't really be a man of God. He's hanging out with the sinners all the time. Right? Well, he's doing that for a reason, to share the gospel with them. So if we do the same, that's good. If we hang out with the sinners such that they make us sinners, that's not good, right? But if we hang out with the sinners and then show the light, then we're doing the Lord's work.
Then began he to upbraid the cities wherein most of his mighty works were done, because they repented not. Woe unto thee, Chorazin! Woe unto thee, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works which were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon at the day of judgment than for you. And thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven, shalt be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I say unto you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee.
All right, so once he kind of gets on a roll here, and he's already talking about the people who don't seem satisfied or criticize everything, right? Now he's going to talk about certain cities in particular, right? So in 20 he says he began to upbraid the cities where most of his mighty works were done because they repented not. In other words, that cities and places that have seen miracles, have seen my works, and yet they're not repentant, they're not being affected. I mean, these are people who are hard-hearted and are just not going to understand, right? So he's comparing them to other cities which were known as sinful cities, right? So like the first one, he says, "Woe unto thee, Chorazin and Bethsaida," right? And he says, if what you saw had been seen in Tyre and Sidon, which were considered pagan-type cities, they would have repented long ago, all right? So even the people who were unbelievers in these cities would have repented if they saw what you saw, all right? But yet you saw it and nothing, right? And sometimes I think the same is that we witness certain things today, and certain people witness certain things, and you say, gee, if that was me, that would really affect me, or that would really make me want to be closer to God. And yet people witness these things, and then they don't. There's no change, right? So you say, gee, if somebody else would have seen the same thing, it would have made a big difference to them, but to this one, it didn't make any difference, right? So notice he says though in 22, he says, "But I say unto you, it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon at the day of judgment than for you," all right? Because they didn't see these things. So again, whatever that means, all right? But in other words, just somebody who witnesses the things of God and refuses them or rejects them is worse off than somebody who maybe just didn't see them at all, right? So he didn't have the same opportunity to witness what the Lord could do. And then the same example with 23 and 24. So it talks about Capernaum seeing his works, right? And compares that to the city of Sodom, which as you know from the Old Testament, Sodom and Gomorrah, they were like the worst of the worst, right? I mean, it's such that they were destroyed from heaven by God, right? Fire and brimstone poured down from heaven and destroyed the cities. They were that evil, right? But he says Sodom, it won't be as bad for Sodom in the day of judgment than for Capernaum in this case, because Capernaum saw Jesus and saw what he could do, right? So in other words, no matter how bad somebody may seem on earth, right, if they didn't witness the things of God, well then they're not as accountable as those who did witness it.
At that time Jesus answered and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight. All things are delivered unto me of my Father, and no man knoweth the Son but the Father, neither knoweth any man the Father save the Son, and he to whomsoever the Son will reveal him.
Now, when you look at it that way, you might say, well, why is he choosing one over the other, right? But, those who were the wise and the prudent, right, are those who are wise and prudent in the things of the earth, right? So basically, they're too smart to go for this stuff, right? Because they can't really have faith or believe in something like this because no, I'm too smart for that. I'm not going to believe these kind of things. Whereas the babes, right, or I would just we rephrase that as people who are more innocent and so forth. All right, they're open to it. They're open to the Lord's teaching, the Lord's examples, all right? So that's why they wind up receiving it and the others don't. It's not that he's intentionally saying, no, you're not going to see this, I'm only going to show it to this one. But the same thing is really there for everybody, but some people, they just have that block. They figure, I'm too smart for this, and you see the same thing today, all right? There's lots of people who think that, that if they have a certain level of education or intelligence, and I don't need that religion stuff, that's for people who have a lower level of intelligence or whatever, right? I mean, there's plenty of people who think that, right? But so therefore it's hidden from them. But those who are more innocent and able to receive it, then there it is. Just in 27, understanding that to know the Father, you have to know the Son. And so that's why he's here representing the Father. And so if you know me, you know him. You know him, you know me.
Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light.
This is a fairly often quoted passage. This would be addressed to those, says, who all who are labor and are heavy laden. In other words, you feel like you have a lot of burdens in life, you're carrying a lot of weight in life, there's a lot on you, all right, the worries and cares and so forth. He says, give it to me. He says, give it to me. He says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. In other words, you think you have your own burden. He said, well, it says, take my yoke upon you. He says, and learn of me, for I'm meek and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest unto your souls. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So in other words, you give it to him, and then your burden becomes light, right? Because now you're not carrying it yourself, he's carrying it with you. It doesn't mean it goes away necessarily, but the Lord can give you strength to get through your trials, to get through your day, to get through whatever problems it is, that he helps to carry it for you, right? Because he gives you the peace that passes understanding. He gives you that strength. He gives you the ability to go from day to day, to understand that things in this world are just temporary, right? And we have certainly a hope of a better day, that the Lord loves us, that he's there for us, that he's going to provide for us, right? All these things help to make the burden lighter. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily make it go away, it just makes it lighter because he helps us to carry it. Okay, so that's what he means when he says that my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He means with me, your burden will be easier and your burden will be lighter.